Again, thanks so much for joining our second webinar in our student success series, where today we're going to be going over confidence in communication, a super important skill to learn and practice no matter your age. Today, I'm joined by our frequent webinar collaborators, Dr. Amy Dietzman and Henry Price, as they will be going over all the different ways that you can build your confidence as well as your communication skills for both professors and peers. So without further ado, I'll pass it on over to them.
Good morning, everybody. This is Henry Price. It's great to see so many people logging in to talk to us today to talk about confidence and communication. And that's actually kind of how this session is going to go. I'm going to spend some time talking about confidence, and then Dr. Dietzman is going to spend some time talking about how to communicate with confidence. So that's really what we're going to accomplish today. Here are the actual objectives. So first, welcome one more time for those of you who are continuing to log in. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to define achievement and its relationship to confidence. We're going to identify common obstacles to confidence. We're going to discuss concrete steps that are proven to increase your confidence, and then examine ways to communicate with confidence. So whether you're an online student or an on-campus one, whether you're in high school, college, teenager, young adult, or like me, middle-aged adult, these strategies can help you. As always, we'll tell stories from our own experiences as working adults, former college students, educators, parents. Take it all, take bits and pieces, but let's get started. So first up, let's set the stage for the belief that's at the core of what we're talking about today. Confidence is built on achievement. So if you haven't achieved anything in a particular lane of your life, you're less likely to say, look at me, I'm awesome. But those achievements don't have to be huge. Confidence is built literally like a building, one brick at a time. Did you submit your first paper in that business class? Did you pass a quiz? Did you make it through all your classes on time this week? Did you ask a question in class? These are all small building blocks to reach a point of confidence where you no longer question yourself, but instead you can affirm yourself. I wanted to talk a minute about activity and how that relates to the concept of achievement. And there's no better way in my world to do that than to talk about one of my great inspirations, and that's Coach John Wooden. John Wooden coached UCLA basketball in the 60s and 70s, and I'm not quite old enough to remember all of that, but I do remember guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You may remember he's in the news this week. His all-time scoring record was just broken about 36 hours ago by LeBron James. So his college coach, John Wooden, was so much more than a coach. He won tons of championships at UCLA, unprecedented and unmatched success. But maybe more importantly, he wrote books and gave talks in which he was able to establish life philosophies that resonate for everyone. And if you don't believe me, ask those guys who played for him when they were 18, and they stayed close with him, like Kareem, when they were in their 70s, and Coach Wooden was pushing 100. I could quote him all day. But the reason I bring him up today is for one specific thing he said that I feel like captures today's goals perfectly. Never mistake activity for achievement. In basketball, this might mean things like don't take lots of shots, take good shots. Don't just be fast and loud and flashy. Do things that help you win games. And that's a really important life lesson, I think, for all of us. When we're trying to accomplish something, and especially when we feel overwhelmed, we might feel that just doing more things is the answer. For example, one of my part-time jobs in college was to work the reception desk in the administration building. I'd see people take the elevator up and down every day, and they'd ask each other how they were doing. We've all been in that situation, right? And it seemed like most of the time, the person's answer was busy, or well, it's almost the weekend, or well, it's Monday, or something like that. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but I heard this all day, every day for months, and I started asking myself, did those comments actually answer the person's question? They're telling you things that happen to them, mostly things that are outside their control, but they're not telling you anything about how they feel, which was the question, right? And yet, we can tell a lot about what they really mean. What they don't feel is in control. outside influences are in charge. And what's more, it's almost as if they're okay with that, almost proud of it, of being so busy. Now, those people might have been at crossing that unfortunate line into mistaking activity for achievement. For a wide variety of reasons we don't have a lot of time to get into today, contemporary society, especially American society, values activity. If you're busy, the assumption is that you're productive, working a lot, studying a lot, especially if you feel a bit overwhelmed by it all, you must be doing the right thing, right? I don't know. But now let's be clear. Activity isn't bad. We all need to get a lot done, and we all go through periods of busyness and stress. That's part of life. We just have to make sure we're not busy 100% of the time. And more importantly, the things we're doing are productive, not just keeping us busy. If not, the impact of this can take a toll on us psychologically in very concrete ways. All right, everybody knows what FOMO stands for, right? The fear of missing out. It's kind of become a running joke on social media, but it's a real thing. Studies have shown that social media posts that show our friends or celebrities we might follow living their best life can create an inferiority complex. We judge other people's lives by their carefully curated public image, and we judge our own lives by the harsh realities of our everyday routine. Not only do we wish we could live a life more like theirs, we wish we could feel as happy as they look. But comparing how someone looks to how we feel is the worst kind of apples and oranges. They may not feel any better than we do. They just look like they do. And maybe in our own social media posts, we look happier than we are too. However, those other people may feel seeing them at their best while we feel our worst makes it tempting to conclude that there's some magical standard of happiness that everybody else but us has figured out. And that leads us to a closely related and can be more damaging issue. Have you looked around the classroom or at your workplace or at a social event or, yes, on social media and thought, man, everybody else has life figured out and I'm just faking it over here. And if they ever notice, I'm in so much trouble. This may be a sign of something called imposter syndrome, which is roughly defined as a feeling of personal incompetence that persists despite education, experience, and accomplishment. It could be constant or occasional in your life, but it isn't fair to yourself no matter how often you're doing it. Now, our session today can't solve these psychological issues for anyone. We don't have the qualifications or the time to do that. But we did feel it was important to acknowledge that everyone experiences these feelings from time to time. And if you're feeling them all the time, they have the potential to become bigger and more problematic mental health concerns. So you may want to talk to a counselor or psychologist if you feel trapped in those patterns. What we are here to do today is to discuss how to authentically build your confidence in concrete and lasting ways that are in your direct control. And there's no more direct place for you to do that if you are currently a student than in your role in a classroom. And one of the more direct ways to do that as a college student is to take control of your schedule. I started my career with this company as an SAT teacher. And one of the things we emphasize in SAT prep is to stop spending so much time on the stuff you don't know how to do and go run up the score on questions you find easier. It's easier to go from good to great in an area you already understand just by slowing down and double checking your work than it is to go from bad to good in an area you more or less have to learn from scratch just for the test. Now, of course, we all want to be great at everything. You probably once got a report card full of A minuses and one C. And you and your parents probably obsessed about getting that C up to a B. But it might be easier to get all those A minuses up to A's and A pluses. For now, leaving the C alone. It's less stressful and it's more impactful, and the impact on GPA would be bigger. That approach is actually more in line with how people are actually built and how the real world works. But our schooling as kids kind of makes us question that. We think we have to be good at everything right off the bat. And more to the point for this webinar, confidence creates more confidence. If you worked on those A minuses and got them up to A's and A pluses, or nailed all those easier questions on the SAT first, then you'd feel a lot better about yourself. And your brain would be clearer and more able to focus when it's inevitably time to tackle those harder questions or raise up that C. And you know what? There's not a lot of job descriptions out there in the real world looking for candidates who are literally good at everything. Most of them are looking for someone who's really, really good at a couple of things that are in the job description. So this whole well-rounded jack of all trades, no weaknesses thing that we get used to growing up, not necessarily how the real world actually works. So build your confidence and momentum slowly and deliberately. And when it does become time to take that hard class or take on those harder tasks, turn off that inner critic. Yeah, you're going to have to work a little harder in some classes than others. It's not that you can't learn it, it's just that you don't know how to do it yet. And that's when something like imposter syndrome may be telling you that everyone else in the room already has this nailed. But if they did, why would they even be in this class? They're probably in the same boat you are. Now, naturally, there will be some things you're better at than others, and there will be people who are better than you are at some things. But remember, you're better at some other things than they are too. So rather than see them as competition or evidence that you can't cut it, just get to know them. Maybe you can help each other out. Kind of circling around the idea of framing here. Framing is a way people respond or react to a particular situation depending on how it's presented to them. You might have had a professor start class on the very first day of the semester by saying something like, everyone in this room has an A. All you got to do for the next 16 weeks is maintain that A. Now, this kind of sounds weird when you first get to know this. It's a little intimidating even, especially if you're struggling with something like imposter syndrome, which is probably saying, yeah, everyone but me has an A, and sometime in the next 16 weeks, I'm going to be found out. But instead, try to see this for what it is. It means you have control over what happens. We'll talk about more about how in just a sec. If you're intimidated by large classes, and that happens a lot for first-year college students, this is for in-person and online students, see if you can take the smaller ones first. The large lecture courses are probably necessary, but maybe not in your first or second semester when you're just starting to get used to the whole college thing. The same is true for the tough classes that are outside your comfort zone. You probably have to take them, but you may not have to take them first. Work with an advisor to build an academic plan that helps you gain momentum with classes you're sure you can handle first. Now, remember that whole framing idea? Instead of having to earn an A from scratch, you already have it and you just have to figure out how to keep it. Let's dig around in how to do that. The more prepared you are, the more organized you will feel. And as a result, the more confident you will feel. You can put this into action by doing small things that are within your control, like getting to class early. We've all seen those movie scenes where the student runs into the big lecture hall late and interrupts the whole class, and everybody's staring at them, and they slink down into a seat, and everyone's like, who's this person? Does that look like a confident student to you? Arriving early isn't just a thing brown nosers do to impress professors. It lets you take control of your environment. It lets you find a seat that you prefer. It lets you talk to your classmates a little bit. It maybe allows you to catch your professor to ask them a question that came up while you were studying. This is true for an online class too. And if your assignments include engaging with classmates online by a certain due date, don't be the one who posts 5 minutes before it's due. Post early, respond to others, write thoughtfully, see what they have to say about your work and give them feedback on theirs. Research shows this will positively impact your grades. Take good notes. This will help you with your confidence, whether or not you feel like it at the time. Notes are a way to engage in class, pay attention, participate, follow what the instructor's saying. To feel confident, you have to be engaged. You have to know what's going on in class. While note-taking of itself is a bit of an art, and there's many ways to do it, writing, typing, making a recording, it's a great way to begin the process of confidence building. And also dress for success. And this is a part of everything in your life. How we dress projects not only our own confidence, but how we view ourselves and how seriously we take what we're doing. Now, there are, of course, good and bad ways to go about this. But the point is, you may have convinced yourself it doesn't matter how you look, or that looking and feeling overwhelmed and stressed is actually a kind of a power move, right? Remember those people in the elevator and mistaking activity for achievement. But if you are struggling with your confidence, Dressing how you feel your best, whatever that means for you, and I'm not here to tell you what that is, can really help. When you're more confident, you'll do better at everything in your life. So remember, you already have the A, so keep up with assignments, pay attention, ask questions when you have them. Do that, and you will be granted that A you already deserve. And you may or may not have ever heard a professor actually say that, but you can start saying it to yourself in any class you take, because it's true. Another way to build confidence, and this is going to sound really obvious, but bear with us for a sec, is to actually complete all of your work. When you're not feeling confident, your reaction might be to get frustrated and stop when something gets hard. Now, as we've said, this isn't always a bad idea. Go do something a little bit more achievable first, like the easier SAT questions, right? Or take a break and tackle this when you're in a better headspace. But when it starts to go badly is when you just throw your hands up and try to ignore it for as long as possible. Then it hangs over you for longer and longer and stresses you out more. So instead, when you encounter something frustratingly hard, go back and read, reread all the assigned work from that class. That includes those notes you've been taking, right? And if the answers aren't there, look for additional resources like YouTube videos and other websites that might communicate this content in a way that speaks better to you. And what we talked about a minute ago, right? Show up early, ask questions, engage, use your professor as a resource. Do every assignment. Now, in a hard class, you probably need all the practice and points that you can get. It may not seem that way at a time, but assignments don't exist just to keep you busy. They're designed to help you learn. So a lot of times when we're doing homework, we feel like we're stuck in that activity versus achievement loop. But well-designed assignments aren't just activity. They're helping us achieve. Submit them early. Rather than letting some intimidating assignment loom over you, making you feel more and more anxious, just get it done and then submit it. Check it off your list. You might get feedback from your professor too, but either way, you'll feel more confident knowing you did it. Wake up the next day having one less big burden hanging over you. It's a wonderful feeling, even if you hated doing it at the time. And yes, you might get feedback from your professor. Your professors are not just there to tell you that you already know it all, and they won't. Well, the good ones won't. And they won't just give you a grade that at the end of the class and have that be the end of it. They're there to push you to be smarter, to think more critically, to look at issues from different angles, to write better, to problem solve. And that's all coming from the feedback that they provide. The earlier you turn something in, the more thoughtful their feedback can be. Take that feedback, see it as a chance to grow and learn. Now, speaking of college professors, Dr. Amy Dietzman over here used to be one. So now that we've spent some time establishing how important it is for you to effectively communicate with professors, I'm going to hand it back over to her, and she's going to talk about how to communicate with those professors.
Awesome. That was so good, Henry. Thank you so much. So Henry spoke to you about ways to build confidence as a student. I'm going to continue with that a little bit and talk more about how you can be an effective communicator, both in and out of school, and then how that might lead to your feelings of confidence. Being assertive is a core communication skill. This skill takes practice and courage. Assertiveness can help you express yourself effectively and stand up for your point of view. But it can also help you do this while respecting the rights and beliefs of others. Assertive communication encourages healthy dialogue between you and people you work with, or maybe you and college peers or your professors. Being assertive can also help boost your self-esteem and your self-confidence and earn others' respect. It helps you keep people from taking advantage of you. Learning to communicate assertively also helps with stress management. More than likely, everyone listening right now has been in one of these camps or both. You have this difficult conversation with someone and you walk away and you think, oh, I should have said this, or I should have said that. Oh, I wish I would have said that. Or on the flip side, you think, oh, I said too much. I think I hurt somebody's feelings, or maybe I made myself look a little stupid. Now, this kind of thing is stressful and discouraging. So learning the skill of saying exactly what you want to say when you want to say it sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Learning to be more assertive can also help you effectively express your feelings when communicating with others about issues that are based on facts and not emotions. So you may be wondering, what is assertive communication exactly, and how do I do it? Well, let's look at some more details. In order to communicate assertively, you have to be an active listener and demonstrate authenticity. So as a student, you have a lot of listening to do. A lot of what you're listening to is new information. So you're not just listening, but you're trying to process the information. You're trying to actively take notes. And as an active listener, you are laser focused on the message and the speaker, which helps your ability to respond and interpret that message that's being delivered. Active listening is a skill, and it's one that many of us need to refine because we've all gotten so used to multitasking. To be an active listener, you have to very deliberately turn off all those distractions around you and almost form like a tunnel. That's how I see it, between you and the speaker, you and your professor, or you and this video that you're watching for a class. So try this. Try it with your boss. That's a high stakes one. Try it with a friend the next time you're out to lunch. Try it with your spouse or your kids. Just tell yourself, I'm going to listen actively right now. And becoming an active listener can actually help you develop better communication skills and lead to deeper and more meaningful insights. Obviously, I mean, that sounds obvious, which can particularly serve students when it comes to studying, when in the work environment, and also really importantly, when you're interviewing for a new job. So I have interviewed a lot of people for job openings, and I have had many, many times where I have asked a question and the interviewee talks for 5 minutes, but never answers the question. I've even interviewed people who talk for 5 minutes and then say, oh, sorry, what was the question? What that says about them is they don't listen, or they at least don't actively listen. In fact, being a good listener will help you improve your social interactions and relationships, which leads to another key communication skill essential to college students, and that's the art of being authentic. Many of us know right away when someone's not being genuine. Real relationships come from transparency, originality, and a genuine connection to one another. When we communicate, we must use our true, authentic voice, one that shows others who we really are, and in turn is more readily understood and accepted. So listening and authenticity will help also to enhance your ability to, very importantly, persuade, influence, and negotiate. We all need to do those things. Okay, so those are a few steps for assertive communication. Let's talk about faking it till you make it. Amy Cuddy was a professor at Harvard Business School. She researched how our body language is tied to what we think about ourselves and what other people think about us. Essentially, her research, which I will note has been quite controversial, showed that if you can fake confidence, then you will actually start to believe it. So before a job interview, rather than sitting in a waiting room, hunched over your phone, which is considered a low power pose, you should go in the bathroom when no one can see you probably, and strike a high power pose to gather some confidence before that interview. So this is what a high power pose looks like. Now, Amy did research on this, and the people who participated in her study were more confident just by striking a confident pose, showing that body language can change our minds. So you should sit in the classroom and take up some space rather than sitting with your legs crossed and hunched over your desk, hunched over your notes. Make eye contact with others. Welcome others to sit next to you and be approachable. So I shared this with my husband, this whole story about Amy Cuddy and faking it till you believe it. And he reminded me of a position that he took many, many years ago. He'd been doing this contract work for a company, and they offered him a full-time senior position. He had at that point what is called imposter syndrome, just like Henry talked about a few minutes ago, where we think we aren't good enough, or we shouldn't be there, or we don't deserve it. People might question us and our legitimacy. So he was really nervous. He started the job, and I remember we bought all new clothes and he dressed the part. He walked in there with confidence and he took the lead. He worked really hard to get up to speed. Sometimes he was reading late into the night just so he could fill in the gaps of his knowledge. But eventually he grew into that position and he was the senior guy. He faked it and then he became it. So how does this apply to you? Well, I'm not sure. I don't know you, but you can you fake it in a hard class until you actually feel confident? Can you sit up tall, take up some space in your next job interview? Can you go on camera and off mute in your next Zoom meeting and engage with your coworkers? Can you project confidence even when you don't really feel it to inspire others to have confidence in you? Communication can take on different forms, meanings, and context, all based on the tone of our voice in a conversation. Communicating in pleasant tones and a clear message breeds confidence, particularly in an interview or in a classroom environment where we really feel a lot of pressure. Practice being clear and concise in your presentation, even when you're just talking to your friends. You know that person who talks like this? I have this idea and it's a great idea and I think it's pretty good. And I thought about sharing this idea with some friends and then I almost told you last week, but then I decided I should wait. And I've been thinking about it a lot and it's just something, I don't know, I'm not really that sure, but I think it's time to tell you. Now, if you heard someone say that, you would be like, oh my gosh, just tell me. Like, what are you trying to say, right? You just talked for a whole minute and said nothing. Don't be that person. Get to your point and be precise. When you're talking or emailing professors, it's always good to be respectful. Use proper titles and salutations when addressing them. It might seem weird, but if your professor goes by Dr. Smith, then you should address them that way and avoid using their first name. When in doubt, use Professor Smith, unless they specifically say, hey, everybody, call me Dave. You also want to stay away from unnecessary fluff or jargon or casual language when you're talking in class to a professor. This doesn't mean, though, that professors aren't approachable. It just means that they have earned your respect through their accomplishments. So rather than sending an email that starts like this, hey, when's the assignment due? Try using respectful and concise language like this student. Here's a good example. This student says, dear Professor Smith, my name is Emma Jones. Then she goes on to say, here's how you know me. I'm writing because I heard you say in class that you have an open position in your research lab. I found the summary of your project very interesting. I'd like to talk to you about it. And really what's important here is that the student told the professor exactly who she was and what class she was in. She demonstrated that she had been listening in class, and check out her signature. All the pertinent information that this professor needs about her is right there. You always have to remember that professors generally teach more than one class, so they have a lot of students they're keeping track of. And so you need to give them all this information so they can quickly identify who they're trying to help. So that leads me to asking the right questions. So when I was a college professor, I would get emails that were as general as, hi, I don't understand this assignment. Think about my response back. Okay, what don't you understand? What have you done so far? Is there something specific I can help you with? I mean, seriously, this is a very difficult question for a professor to help with. And I will add that many times students would not sign those emails, and those emails would come from their personal email address. So I had no idea who like Dancer17 was. So also the signature is important. So add the right details, like what have you done so far? Have you tried to decipher the directions? What specifically is confusing for you? Not only does this show the instructor that you're willing to do the work and that you have put forth some effort, but it also shows this instructor that you took the time to explain yourself, communicate effectively and assertively, and that you care. It is also a good idea to let the professor know that you've listened to them if you have any kind of lecture that you're reading something that a professor wrote. Try starting out your email with, in class, I heard you say blank. And then I read the materials and the assignment directions, but I'm still having a hard time finding blank. Can you point me in the right direction? See, here you're not asking the professor to give you the answer. You're just asking for more specific help. And this skill will take you so much farther than just in the education world. It's going to help you in the business world too. Managers and supervisors value employees who listen well and ask clarifying questions when they are assigned work. And consider how it can help you in an interview. By speaking clearly and confidently, asking probing questions, and demonstrating good writing skills, you're showing prospective employers that you are a well-rounded applicant. So we talked about confidence and communication. Let's tie it all together now and bring in ways that you can increase your confidence to become a successful student. So Henry touched on this, that when we're young and we're in elementary school, we're in high school, we're taught work independently. Don't cheat. Don't share your notes. Don't ask your classmates for help. Try to get A's in everything. And when we're getting older and we start working, we realize it's good to work with other people. It's okay to be an expert in one area and share that knowledge with someone, and then go back to that same person when you need their expertise. We don't all have to be good at everything. Interdependence means that you depend on others when you need to, and you let them depend on you as well. And this is a critical skill to learn while you are a college student. Interdependence in college leads to student success. Do you know how to develop relationships that can help you when you need support? Do you know how to be a good listener with compassion and empathy? And can you demonstrate care and concern for others? These are signs that you are thriving in college rather than struggling. And you might notice that all of these things are related to communication and confidence. The better you communicate and feel confident, the more likely you are to reach out for help. Create a sense of belonging and community, and find opportunities to talk with your professors and with your classmates. Next thing is to make a to-do list. That helps you so much. Making a to-do list, crossing things off, helps you with your confidence, your motivation, and your momentum. Feels so good to cross something off a list and know you've done it. Remember that first quote that Henry showed you: confidence is built on achievement, one step at a time. Focus on the yet. I haven't got there yet, but I will. I haven't finished this yet. I haven't mastered this yet. Remind yourself that you can and you will. This test is going to be hard, but I'm going to study. I'm going to get good rest, and I'm going to do well. I'm smart enough to do this. That's the key to a growth mindset and not a fixed one. And here's an example. If you are normally shy and introverted and you get invited to a party and you go for a while, you end up leaving a little early. You might say, ooh, that was a kind of a negative experience. It was overwhelming, and so I left early. It was really uncomfortable talking to all those people. Try to consider the fact that despite usually keeping to yourself, you actually went to the party. You normally wouldn't. That's a success. Seeing the silver lining in every situation will help you gain more perspective and feel good about yourself in the grander scheme of things. And the same is true with school. Maybe you would normally never speak in public, but for your public speaking class, you had to. You gave a speech. You got a C on it. You wanted to do better, but you did it. You gave the speech and you didn't pass out. You accomplished it. Failure is similar. We all fail at something. When we fail, we learn and we get stronger. Hopefully you don't fail a test or a class, but remember that failure doesn't mean it's all over. It's just a new beginning. The first speech I ever gave in my first year of college, I got the giggles in the middle of the speech, and I could never pull myself together. I was unable to finish the speech. I failed that assignment. I actually barely passed that class. And by the time I was a senior in college, well, public speaking was my thing. You might have noticed I do enjoy it. I learned, I took the failure, and I moved on. When you have confidence, you can have a lot of fun. And when you have fun, you can do amazing things. I love this. Try to make difficult things fun, and fun is a relative term here. Working on a group project may not be your favorite way to socialize, but can you make it fun? Studying for a test is not necessarily fun, but could you do it with friends? When I was 20 years old and about to start my senior year of college, I had to get my biology class out of the way. I had been dreading it and I had clearly put it off. My academic advisor suggested I just go take a summer school class at my local community college. I really didn't want to. I dreaded it. I had to take this class in the middle of the summer in Phoenix, Arizona, when all I really wanted to do was lay out by the pool. Right before my first exam, my lab partner and a few others decided that we should meet up at IHOP and study together. So we started this little study group and we ended up meeting at IHOP every week for the remainder of that class. I actually looked forward to those study sessions. It was pretty fun. One rule of confidence is to know when you've done your best. When it comes to studying for a test or writing a paper, at some point you have to stop and say, I know what I know. I've done all I can. Don't compare yourself to others. What is good for one student is not always good or appropriate for you. And this goes both ways. The student who's happy just scraping by and passing with a D- might not have the same goals that you have. And the student who's trying to ace this class because they're trying to get into medical school, well, they might not have the same goals that you have. Set your own goals that are realistic for you and don't worry about anybody else. So I hope that that has helped all of you a little bit with confidence and with communication and a few steps you might try taking in your next class. So next week, just to give you a little heads up, we're doing teamwork and collaboration, same time. If you're interested in that, you're going to get that information coming to you. And this is a really cool webinar about how important it is to learn about teamwork and collaboration in college and where it takes you in your life. So we have so much to share. And now I'm going to pass it back to Maxine and see if anybody has questions for us.
All right. Thank you guys so much for all of that information. It was super helpful. And I am jealous of everybody who is still in school who got to join us today because it would have been fantastic for me back in college. Before we get to questions, which if anybody does have any questions, feel free to drop those in the question box now and we'll be able to go through those. I did just want to highlight what is on the screen right now. So again, we have a bunch of different social channels. They're going to be really important for you to follow us on Instagram or Facebook, because that's where we post a lot of information about upcoming webinars. So if you found this one helpful, if you find this information useful, sign up or join us on Facebook or Instagram, and you'll see when the next ones are happening. And additionally, if you go to tutor.com/YouTube webinars, that is going to have basically all of our previous webinars that we've done. So you can just easily go and watch those there. Now, Amy, we did have one question that kind of just wanted to go over something that you mentioned earlier on the slide called asking the right questions, and that was clarifying questions. Can you give an example of a good way to phrase one?
To phrase clarifying questions?
Yes, yeah.
Great. That's a great question. So Henry, feel free to jump in if you have any ideas. But I definitely think, like I said, when you want to ask any clarifying questions of a professor, it's always a good idea to start with what it is that you do know, what it is you've tried to do, and that will help lead into what it is that you need to know. So it's like the example I gave was about a student who may say, I read the directions and this is what's tripping me up, or I listened to you in class and I heard you say this, but I'm not quite sure what you meant. Or, here's an example of something that I was trying to write and I got stuck on this. And can you tell me maybe where I could go next? It's just things like that. I think it's always best to start off with what you've done and then be very, very specific about where you got stuck. And that will help you formulate that clarifying question you're looking for. Henry, did you have anything else to add to that?
Only this, I feel like that ties really well into the concept of active listening too. Have you ever watched a reporter do an interview or watched a lawyer do a cross-examination? They don't just have a list of questions they ask. Well, the good ones don't just have a list of questions that they're going to ask. When they hear something, they ask follow-up questions, right? They'll go off script if they need to and say, hey, wait a minute, I just heard you say XYZ. Can you expand on that? Can you clarify that for me? So active listening is a really key part of being of asking the right kinds of questions. And when you're in a setting where it's a college professor or a job interview or someone else that you're kind of trying to impress, that goes over really well. It gives them a boost of confidence that you were really paying attention to what they were saying.
That was
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great example. And then you also just kind of mentioned professors and being in class. Someone wanted you to kind of go over again the examples of building confidence within the class. And then also to expand upon that, what to do when your confidence gets shaken. So, for example, if you're following those different skills that you've gone over before, and then you do poorly on a test, how to not like basically let all of the confidence slide away.
Good question. Henry, do you want to take that one or do you want me to?
Well, there's two questions there, right?
Yeah.
Going over the examples, I saw that in the Q&A as well, and I'm not sure whether you're looking for the examples that we went over in my section, just like the things like the framing and choosing the right classes and attending them all the time. We could certainly go back over that. In fact, here you go. Here's the slide that has all of that. Start with what you know rather than tackle the hardest thing first. Give yourself time to build momentum. Don't criticize yourself. Framing is the thing about like, I already have an A, right? I just have to keep it. And then enrolling in smaller classes you're more comfortable with, rather than tackle the hardest stuff up front. And then also attending classes regularly and completing all of your work. Those were all things that I mentioned. And Amy, I think you had a few more along those lines too.
Yeah, the things I talked about were assertive communication. So that went into, the active listening and being authentic with your message, making sure that you're clear and articulate when you're asking questions, explaining what you tried. And the whole fake it till you make it thing is also kind of answering the further question about what do you do when you lose your confidence? Sometimes you have to fake it. What other ideas might we have, Henry, to share about that?
Yeah, the second question about what to do when your confidence is shaken, I think the most important thing is always to remember that what we talked about a little bit ago, which is no one's good at everything, and especially not up front. I honestly struggled with this too. I still do. When I'm not, my wife kind of calls me on this sometimes too. When I don't already think I'm good at something, I don't want to do it. If I feel like I'm supposed to know everything, it's silly. When you say it out loud, it's obviously silly, right? But we all struggle with that, or at least a lot of us do, struggle with the idea that, I'm not already good at this. Maybe I should go do something else and forget this ever existed, right? Now, again, maybe this is just not the class that is in the area that you care the most about. And maybe you're not ever going to see an A+ in this class, and beyond your GPA, that will literally never matter again, right? Because secret, when you apply for jobs, they don't ask for your GPA. They do not want to know how you did on every test you ever took, right? So it's not always the most important thing in the world when it happens. But if it is something where you literally can't get by without raising that grade, try to remember it's just one test. It's a long process of learning. You're not going to be great at everything the first time. See if you can identify exactly what it was that cost you those points on that test and address those directly.
And remember that yet statement. Okay, I'm not great yet, but I will be. That's a growth mindset. Remember that we don't all know everything all at once. We're all growing. We're all learning. We're learning from failure. So it's easy to say this to yourself. I know it's a lot harder to actually make it stick, but also reminding yourself that okay, just not there yet.
Awesome. Yeah, we got actually a really interesting question, which was talking about how to deal with overconfidence and making sure that you don't become overconfident in your skills. Do you have any kind of points or feedback for that?
Hmm.
Looking at this from the opposite direction now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it really depends on where that's coming from. And here's what I mean. Um, I have a weird thing that I do, and it relates to what I was just saying a second ago. Like, I feel like I'm supposed to be good at everything, right? And I have a weird thing where I am like terrified of being overconfident, which is actually not something to be terrified of, right? If I lack confidence, then I'm probably not going to skip past competence and then be overconfident next, right? So it's really not as it's not a super likely leap from lacking confidence to being overconfident. That said, overconfidence can come possibly from not fully respecting the process. What you might look for triggers that you're overconfident when you look back at some of the things we talked about today, like active listening, taking good notes, and you think you've gotten to the point now where you're like, I don't really have to do that anymore. I'm good. That's when you can get yourself in trouble. So overconfidence kind of plays out or can play out as not working as hard anymore. And that's when you can, if you realize you're doing that, that's when you can rein it in and be like, let me get back to basics. Let me start doing the things that worked for me in the first place before I get to the point where I think I've graduated from doing the things that work. And then I suddenly find that I'm not successful anymore.
Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty hard to be overconfident as a student on a consistent basis, because we all get into classes that are hard or too hard or knock us down a little bit. We all experience that. And there's very few people who get all the way through 4 years of college or grad school or whatever and just like have it from the very beginning, just have it all. Like they know it all and they just do it. I mean, I've not known anybody like that. So I think overconfidence could be an issue maybe at the beginning of a class until you realize, ooh, it's a little bit harder than I thought, or you don't do well on something. And then you, like Henry said, that's when you rein it in and say, all right, I guess I better take better notes, or I better, pay better attention or show up to class. These things, it sort of changes you. So I think overconfidence is one of those things that we may feel at times, but probably not for very long. That's my experience anyway.
Perfect. I will say we have time for about one more question. So just for people who are asking kind of to go over slides again, a copy of this PowerPoint will be sent over in that follow-up email along with a recording of the webinar. So you can view all that stuff there. Now, Amy, we did have one question that I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about. You mentioned earlier briefly the growth mindset. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. Growth mindset is the belief that we can all get smarter, that we're not just innately, this is me, I'm never going to get any smarter and I can just be who I am, which I'm sure you've probably known people who were kind of had that mindset. So a growth mindset is all about believing that you have an ability, that your intelligence can grow, your talent can grow, that you can challenge yourself and your existing abilities. You see failure as opportunity. So that's one that's, really tricky. Growth mindset, which I think if you're in this webinar, you probably all have a growth mindset because it leads to a desire to learn. You want to learn more. You persist in the face of setbacks. Students with a growth mindset are going to try to persist and accept challenges and persevere in order to be successful. So that's why a growth mindset is so important. It's about like resilience and grit. So important as a student because we are learning constantly and we have to learn sometimes from criticism, professors who are a little hard on us, or like we said before, taking a test and realizing, shoot, I thought I had it and I sure didn't. or writing a paper that you think, okay, I feel pretty good about this. And then you get an instructor who, gives you a lot of feedback and you realize, yikes, I'm not as good of a writer as I thought. But then you still, with all of that, you say, I am going to persevere. I'm going to get better. I'm going to learn. I'm going to keep going. That's a growth mindset. We all need to have that. I mean, there really is no need for any time in your life to have a fixed mindset.
All right, thank you so much. And actually, we just had one more question to come in, and Amy, this one might be helpful to hear from you since you talked about public speaking previously. We have an international student and English isn't their first language. How can they stop being anxious about that situation or become more confident? Or like, what kind of tips do you have from your own
Oh,
experience?
it's so hard. I can only imagine speaking in public when English is not your first language. One thing, and maybe this is a good topic for another webinar, but one thing that I would suggest is when you get up, and depending on your class and your professor, so I can't say this will always work, but it's just to address it. I am from wherever. This isn't my first language. I'm going to do my best. Maybe I'll say some words you've never heard and make a joke about it. And then it eases the audience, because the audience is also going to feel a little nervous for you. And it eases everybody. Really great idea to start a speech with a joke. So if you can try to ease the tension, it'll make you feel relaxed too, to just be able to laugh and say, this is hard for me. And I'm going to do my best, and come along with me and cheer me on, and let's get through it. So I would recommend that. And I think, Henry, I'm guessing you have something else to say.
It's interesting because I've been in a similar situation. I actually spent some time growing up in Germany, going to German school. So I've been the international student going the other direction.
Ooh.
It is a challenge. I was much younger. I mean, I was a little kid when like second grade when we first moved there. So it's very, very different. But now when I go back, and I've been back to Europe a couple of times in the last decade or so, I actually feel the way you feel. I feel really uncomfortable speaking German to this German person because I'm going to be exposed as someone who does not speak German very well anymore, which
Mhm,
is, where all of that information lives in my head. They don't know any of that and they don't care.
mhm.
And coming back this way, I would say I really agree with Amy. I just own it, be clear up front, like it almost make it, sort of like they're in this boat with you. Like, hey, you know what? I'm not a native English speaker. This could be interesting. Let's see what happens. And
Yep.
if they're judging you, that is a them problem. That is not a you problem. Anybody, like, how many languages do they speak? Right? It's not fair. And so I will not promise you no one will judge you, but I will promise you that they shouldn't. And if they are, that is not your fault. And you can simply proceed forward and say, this is who I am. This is the level that I'm at. And what Amy said during the presentation about giving yourself credit for the little things, like going to a party and then leaving early, rather than be like, oh, I can't believe I left early, that was a failure. Be like, I went at all, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you are giving a speech at all in a language this is not yours is really cool. Most people will never even try that in their lives, right? That's really cool. You should give yourself credit for that.
Yep. Great.
All right. I don't see any other questions coming in, and we're coming up to time. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Amy Dietzman and Henry Price, for joining us for the webinar today. We really appreciate it. And just as a reminder, there is going to be that email follow-up. So keep an eye out for that. It'll have links to all of our upcoming webinars, all of these different resources that you see, as well as a recording. So thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful day.